first of all, thank Jonny Thompson from Nichion, who's here with us today to talk to us about the Japanese music market. Trends and opportunities, challenges, what the state of the market is right now. So let's just get right into it.
Good, because we're looking like a comedy duo. This is not good, is it?
Exactly, yeah. It's a little bit better, yes. I'm sure he's the straight man in this outfit, but let's move on from that.
Absolutely so.
All right. Okay, so just tell us really quickly about you and Nichion.
Yes, I'm the director for international at Nichion. Nichion is one of Japan's largest music publishing companies. We're owned by TBS, which is one of Japan's largest broadcasters. I've been in the business close to 30 years now. I used to work at Warner Music and then various incarnations of Japanese labels and publishing companies and so forth and so on. So we're responsible for domestic repertoire and international repertoire. For international, we represent Disney, Warner Chappell, Peer Music, Wixon, Bourne, so forth and so on. And we do both sync and obviously licensing and also songwriting and song pitching as well.
Perfect. Two quick things before we keep going. Because we've got so little time, we're not going to do a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, I'll be very alert. I'll see your hand up, and then we'll send somebody to get your question. And secondly, if we can turn up the AC a little bit. I think it's a little warm in here.
It'll be outside.
Yeah. All right. So let's just begin from the beginning.
Yep.
What is the state of the market in Japan today? What are the challenges and opportunities you face?
The state of the market is good. Japan is predominantly, as everybody probably here already knows and is very familiar with, is a very physical market. We are, I think the numbers will come up later. But
let's get the numbers on there.
We are an 80% physical, 20% digital market. And yes, I see people laughing, it's true. The 20% in digital is very interesting as well. 20% digital is 50% downloads and 50% streaming. So we still have quite a ways to go before we'll kind of catch up in the rest of the world in terms of what's happening digitally. But the streaming side is increasing year on year, although there are some things that we need to talk about within that because it isn't quite the same as what's happening in the rest of the world.
Can you put up the second slide, please? Slide 2. There we go.
No, there you go.
All right.
Okay. Don't know where you want to jump in from there.
Well, let's jump in wherever you want to jump in. And we've got them over here, so
got them
see them better.
there.
Yeah.
No, the thing I wanted to point out is, look, the assumption is that Japan being as kind of, people tend to think of it as being very technologically ahead. But as far as music is concerned, it still is very, very analog. It's very, very grassroots in that regard. So as I was saying, it's 80% physical, 20% digital. Within the 20%, downloads 50%, streaming 50%. But streaming is obviously increasing. However, the streaming numbers in Japan are the total paid subscriber base, and this includes all services going up from Spotify to YouTube to Apple, which is the largest, is about 7.1 million paid subscribers. That's in a country with 120 million people, so we're not even at 10% yet. And until you get up to around about 10 million subscribers in Japan, to make streaming a kind of viable mechanism for generating revenue for music, you need to get to that level, and we're still about 3 million short. So, what I want to say is that you'll see a lot of numbers about Japan in terms of how year on year, streaming increases by double digits or digital's increasing by double digits. You just need to be cautious about what the level of that number is and what the scale of that number is, and that it's a very incremental process and that we have a long, long way to go before anything on the mechanical side or certainly anything on the physical side takes a steep and sharp decline.
So let me ask you a couple of questions on that. The first question I think a lot of people have in their minds is, why is Japan still such a physical-centric marketplace? And the second question is, what is being or not being done to assist the transition towards digital?
Well, I think one of the obstacles to obviously, if your market is 80% physical, there's not a lot of incentive for Japanese labels or Japanese management companies, which control most of the artists, to move to a platform where you're going to be making 0.000005 or whatever per stream.
Yeah.
Not all Japanese artists are available on streaming at the moment. So international, much different story. But as far as Japanese repertoire is concerned, obviously if you're selling physical product, there isn't really an urgency to transition over. Although, again, because of the fact that there is international reach, slowly there's going to be that transition. But, I think part of it also has to do with the fact that, streaming is a very much, at this point in time, a very much audio-based, at least the services that we were currently talking about. And I think in Japan, there is a very much this combination of a visual element together with the audio element, particularly for a lot of the idol groups, which certainly dominate the market. And to have access, not only to the DVDs, but also to the video footage, but also, whether it's packaging in terms of extra photos and all of that, still plays a really important part in the market for domestic artists. So.
That makes a lot of sense, because when you think about, that's why I wanted to ask you, because when you think about physical in Japan, it's not the delivery method of the music so much as it is everything around it. You've got something that's basically a piece of merchandise. It's something that you can personally have of the music and the musicians, and plus you have other types of content that's usually included when you buy a CD.
Yeah, I agree. And there are other things that are limiting kind of the growth of digital in Japan, which may change in the years to come. For example, most of the countries of the world, and particularly in the US, and where other territories where digital is dominant, particularly streaming is dominant, you have unlimited bandwidth plans, you have all of these other things that make it much more accessible and easier to access the music. And in Japan, we're still on limited fixed bandwidth plans, and that kind of restricts things. I think certainly the government is moving with greater initiatives to free the market up, and what impact that will have, particularly in advance of the Olympics, to certainly make more availability for kind of unlimited bandwidth, certain plans and things like that. That could potentially open up the streaming side a bit more. But again, I think it really gets down to when the Japanese artist management companies, and not so much the labels, but certainly the artist management companies, decide to make the leap over, which again is a very slow process at the moment. So.
And that's a really good point, because the management companies in Japan have a role that's different than a lot of other countries. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit to educate the audience?
It's already happening in the rest of the world, and what's happening in the rest of the world with a lot of artists that you already see in terms of the management company controlling the master, controlling the publishing, controlling touring, controlling concerts, merchandise, everything related to the artist is usually based within the management company. So record companies, by and large in Japan, basically serve two functions. One is to distribute the product, and the other is to help with promotion and marketing. And it's a very different system in that the ownership rights to masters and publishing stay with the management company for the particular artist. So, for example, if a Japanese pop idol group is making an album, the album is owned by the management company, which then leases the rights to the album to the record label for a period of 10 years or whatever, and then it reverts back. So, the power in terms of determining if you want to go on streaming or if you want to do something globally, or whatever, really, even if the label wants to, the artist management company ultimately has to sign off on it, and that's a much more difficult path to go.
Yeah, it is, and it's something that's really unique in terms of like the 360 control of the management companies. If an act wants to go international, if they want to do something with a different producer, whatever, the management company is the one that ultimately is the decider on that.
Yeah. One thing I was going to add, particularly since this is an international audience, I think one good thing that's happening with streaming in Japan, and something that's going to benefit everybody here, is as a publisher, as a music publisher, what we see is, if you're in a predominantly physically dominated country where most of your sales are coming from CDs or DVDs for that matter, for international, it's very difficult to get released, obviously, in that format in Japan unless you're able to achieve a certain level of sales, certainly 5,000, 10,000 or something like that. But anything under that makes it much more difficult. But what streaming has done is now that we look at royalty statements as a music publisher, we notice a whole group of songs that were not generating any income before, that even though it's very nominal now, at least is getting some exposure in the market. And I think that's very well reflected. You can see it reflected in the fact that even though if you're looking at recorded music, which is the master side and the label side, which is 80-20, in terms of 80% physical, 20% digital. If you look at JASRAC, which is the Copyright Society on the publishing side, you'll notice that the split is 75% domestic, 25% international overall, but for digital, it's much closer to 60% domestic, 40% international. So there's much greater opportunity for international repertoire to getting exposure on the digital side, and also the fact that it also helps to generate a lot of additional income for a lot of songs and a lot of composers and songwriters who most likely wouldn't be able to in a market that's so physically dominant. So.
That's really interesting that it breaks out so differently in both of those markets. You know, that in the physical side, you sort of have the traditional, okay, it's very much a majority Japanese music rights, Japanese music that's domestically created, domestically sold. But on the publishing side and the digital side, why do you think that there's this difference between the two?
In terms of between what and what?
In terms of the difference in terms of the percentage of money that's coming in. You know, why do you think? What would you say is
between physical and digital, or between labels?
No, between.
Don't get me started on record labels, because
no, I'm not talking about record.
They make 5 times more than we do, so I'm not too happy about that. No, it's true. It's true. That's just the nature of the business. That's how it works on the digital side. But
between the music that's domestically created and internationally created.
Well, overall, the market in Japan is, when I started 30 years ago, the market was closer to something close to 75% international, 25% domestic, 80-20 maybe at best. Now it's closer to 90-10. 90% domestic, 10% international. And international has declined over the past 15 years or so. Mm-hmm. A lot of it has to do, there's multiple factors. Some of it has to do with the fact that obviously the domestic side has been able to integrate a lot of the international side of the music into their own music. The other part of it is its musical taste. I mean, Japan and most Asian countries in general tend to be very melody dominated, very song structure tends to be very much A, B, pre-chorus, chorus, and nowadays we're certainly in a market where, certainly if you're looking at U.S. repertoire, whether there is a chorus or whether there's an A or a B or what you're starting from, and repetition all the way through. So I think musically it tends to be less tuned in to what's necessary for the Japanese side.
Right.
And, you know, there are other things that go with that, but, you know, by and large, I think one thing you have to keep in mind, it seems to sound like that there's no opportunity. If that's the case, then what am I doing here? And, you know, what's my potential for doing something in Japan? The other side of that is that even though the artist side is struggling, we're seeing tremendous growth on the songwriter and song pitching side. So if 90% of the market is domestic, then it makes a lot more sense to try and get into that side of the market, domestic side, which is where we take international songwriters from all around the world and have them collaborate together with Japanese songwriters, and then take those songs and pitch them into the Japanese side of the market. So for our company alone, for Nichion alone, we have roughly about 200 cuts per year. Another independent promoter that we work has something like 150 cuts per year. And that kind of compensates for this kind of drop that you see on the mechanical side for international in general. So, you know, it's a big part of what we do, and it's an important area for everybody here that they can access, particularly if you have songwriters or even if you have artists that are songwriters, because if they're able to integrate themselves into or get a song cut and recorded with a Japanese artist, that can be a launching platform for them, both as an artist and also as a songwriter locally. So.
I think that's a really good point, because what that shows is, okay, so the majority of master recordings that are made by domestic acts, but the actual creation of the music, the songwriting of the music, is a collaborative effort between international songwriters and producers. And that's where your opportunity lies to do business with Japan, probably more than anywhere else.
I would agree. Yeah, you know, we would all love to be able to see, you know, a nice, for those of us who worked international for a long time, and particularly if we worked at record labels, you know, we want to see some kind of renaissance of international artists, and that 10% that exists now go back to be 15% or 20%. I just think it's really, really difficult. Yeah. And, you know, the way that labels are oriented now in terms of certainly, you know, taking what repertoire, international repertoire that they have available and putting it on a streaming platform, as opposed to taking a more grassroots approach, which is necessary in Japan in terms of the kind of promotion and marketing. And, we still have print that you have to do, and there's IDs that you have to do, and all of these things that, most people kind of just relegate to being, do I really have to do that?
Right.
Those artists that do continue to do that area of promotion still do very well in Japan, and many of them do. I think there's also issues in terms of trying to bring artists in terms of timing. There's touring issues. We're short of venues right at the moment, and then obviously with international artists who are signed to, major live entertainment companies that want to bring a big package in as opposed to tailoring the package for the local market. I mean, these are all obstacles that have made it, I think, much more difficult than it used to be, where the relationships were much more interpersonal. Things were scaled to work for the Japanese market in particular, and I think that's the big part that's changed right at the moment. So,
I think that makes a good deal of sense. It's just it always goes down to the old adage that if you really want to do something in a local market outside of your own, you've got to put in the time there.
Yeah.
And
Well, this will surprise everybody in the room, and this ties in with what Mark does on the sync side. But if you look at collections from JazzRack, so if I did a top 10 list of the top international income-earning international songs in 2018, you'd be thinking maybe Ed Sheeran, maybe Ariana Grande, maybe somebody that you all recognize. The number one income-generating song for international in Japan in 2018 was YMCA by the Village People. Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because of TV commercials. And that song, YMCA, was used in an ad campaign for a mobile phone company, actually a mobile Wi-Fi company. And they changed the lyric of the song to fit, the name of the company is Y Mobile, to fit the company's name. Right. And that's the biggest. And if you go through the rest of the songs on that list, which I conveniently have, no, because it's interesting. No, because it is. It makes it. You'd be going. Number one is YMCA. Number two is Daydream Believer by the Monkees. Again, this has also been a long TV commercial. And then finally, you get to Dirty Work, which is Austin Mahone's song, and then you get Little Brown Jug, and then finally, which is Amuro Nami, a Japanese artist.
Right.
Sugar Baby Love by the Rubettes, if anybody knows, right? Eat You Up, In the Mood, Just You and I, which is also Amuro Namie's song, Japanese artist, and Over the Rainbow. So it's not anything that you're used to hearing. It's very much anything on international. There's two things that drive international. One are certainly TV commercials, and the other is song pitching. That's really it. And those two Amuro songs that I mentioned, which were in the top 10, why would there be a Japanese domestic artist and a domestic song in the top 10 for international collections from JazzRack? It's because the songwriters were international songwriters. And that's how you drive more income on the international side, at least for what we try and do. So.
Well, that shows, I think, to a great degree, the power of sync. Let's go to the next slide. I'm not sure if it's contextual, but I just want them to be able to look at it. So go to slide 3. Thank you. Okay, domestic versus, okay.
I think we covered most of it.
We covered most of that, but you guys can take notes on that. But, what, of course, gives me joy is what a prominent role sync has in the Japanese market and the international opportunity that it presents. You put into high relief. And that's something that's not going to change because people are going to use those iconic songs for commercials and television for the long term. We get asked this all the time, whether as a music publisher or as a record label. It's the same thing, but all of you have artists that you want to develop or break in Japan. All of you have artists that maybe have had very successful sync opportunities outside of the Japanese market, whether it's in Europe and the US. Japan for sync is just completely different in terms of what their needs are. And, regrettably, I usually have to say to everybody that if you have a new artist and you're trying to break the artist through sync in Japan, most likely it's not going to happen. And the reason is that sync, as just Mark pointed out, is very much dominated by music that's safe, music that songs that are well recognized. And the primary reason for that is the clients themselves don't want to run the risk of using a song that could potentially damage or reflect negatively on the brand that they're trying to advertise. I won't
I'll give you a simple example. But there was an ad campaign that we did for a car company, a very major car company, many, many years ago. And it was a huge campaign. It was for a full year. We signed the deal. The first ad ran. The next day, the artist ran into a tree with a car under the influence of various substances. That day, the ad campaign was canceled. That's it. It's gone. Disappeared. Just because of that fact. And that's really the kind of thing that we're dealing with in terms of, it's not a co-branding. It's not get the artist, get the brand that goes on in the rest of the world. It is very much a fixed need. Now, that doesn't mean to say that newer international artists don't get used. Bruno Mars recently, Justin Bieber, Austin Mahone, things like that. But it's very rare. And most of the syncs in Japan are non-exclusive. Matter of fact, they're all non-exclusive. So you can have the same song running multiple times throughout the year for different ad campaigns. So, I don't want to discourage anybody from saying that, you won't get a sync, but it's very, very difficult. And even if you were with a new artist, it would probably be a very limited, small campaign. However, ad agencies, music production companies, the generation is getting a little younger, and that changes the song selection. We went through a period of 80 songs. Now we're kind of moving in 90 songs. And I think in time, there'll be a little more flexibility there. But again, anything in Japan takes a very, very long time.
And also, I think to your point, one of the other things that makes it difficult to be realistic about your getting a sync in a Japanese commercial or a Japanese TV show is that you're also competing with this huge domestic market. Mm-hmm. And that's not just a huge domestic market that you're competing with, where somebody's going to license something and they're going to pay for it. Yep. The labels will give away a lot of content for free for the promotional value of the commercial's distribution
on the domestic
online,
side,
on the domestic side. So you've always got to keep that in mind that if you have a new artist, it's going to be really hard for that new artist to compete against that sort of internal organization in the marketplace, in addition to anything that you would be going up against in terms of, the sort of conservative nature of their wanting to keep things as safe as possible.
Well, and the other opportunity that you don't have in Japan that exists in other countries, and Mark just alluded to this, is television. So television in Japan, as it is in the UK and some other countries, is covered by a blanket agreement. So there is no sync. You're getting paid for sync through the blanket agreement that the broadcasters pay to the Copyright Society, and a percentage of that gets paid out, and then you get paid based on the cue sheet. But it's not as if, like you have in the US, where you can take a song and try and get it placed on CSI or NCIS. The broadcasters are able to use whatever songs that they want in whatever capacity that they want. The easiest example to give is we have a program that's kind of like the Antiques Roadshow in Japan. It's been running for 25 years now. The opening theme song to the program is Help by the Beatles. That's covered by the blanket. There's no additional money there. There's nothing other than just that particular song being used within the blanket agreement, which wouldn't happen anyplace else in the world. So,
except for the UK.
Except in the UK.
Yeah.
So really, Mark and I were talking about this earlier, and one of my biggest kind of frustrations is that, there seems to be this kind of view that Japan's a very closed, very difficult market to get into. And it's not necessarily closed and difficult. It takes time, but there are avenues that you can get into the market, and it's just trying to explore those avenues as best you can with what you have. The hardest part is trying to do something with an artist and trying to have them, attached with a label and then tour and concert and everything else. You can do it. It just takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of time to get there. The rest has to really do with sync, and as I said earlier, song pitching, which is probably the two most lucrative areas at the moment.
Okay, so then that begs the question for me, and I'm sure some of the audience, how do you get into these situations where you can get some co-writes done with some Japanese producers, artists, organizations such as Nichion and others?
A good song is a good song. A good writer is a good writer. So we tend to be open. Other publishers do the same thing. We just happen to do it a little more regularly than the rest of the publishers. It's the same thing with everybody. You just send a group of songs based on writers that you have. I wouldn't encourage anybody to overly focus on what's popular in Japan at the moment. That's one of the handicaps. If you're trying to write for a Japanese artist, you don't want to imitate what somebody else has already done. What people are looking for is what you're able to do originally. You may want to keep in mind the structure of a particular song, because that structure in Japan is very important. As I said, this kind of basic, what used to be a basic standard pop song, which was A, B, pre-chorus, chorus, and then you have a big middle eighth later on in the song, or middle 16th, depending. But you don't need to get too overly, gee, I'm going to research every Japanese artist and see what they're doing, because what happens is if you lose whatever special quality that you have that you're able to bring to the music or the song that you're composing, it just doesn't transfer very well. And you're better off kind of just writing what you know, what you're good at, bringing the sound elements that you're most comfortable with, and somebody will pick up on those elements, I think. Somebody was mentioning in the K-pop seminar, a K-pop session a little bit earlier, but it's the same thing. In Japan, there's a big difference between K-pop and J-pop, but one of the fundamental similarities is that there are a lot of different styles in one song. So it isn't just one particular style. It can go from rap to hip-hop to disco to Latin to rock, all in the span of a 3.5-minute, 4-minute song. So there's similarities there. Otherwise, it kind of diverges after that. But no, if it's we're a music publisher, so if people have you have good writers and that you're interested in, just send us and we'll make an evaluation based on that. So.
I think that's some really good advice, because basically it's like Jonny said. The tendency is that people will listen to a lot of Perfume and then they'll say, aha, I'm going to write music like that. And that's where you fail, because you know what? They already have that in Japan. Yeah. They have a great guy to do that. What they need is somebody who can understand the sort of musical trends and the patterns of the music, as you said, and be able to adapt their style to it so that it sounds unique, but also it gives a context of understanding how people consume and create music in the market.
And it also takes a business understanding. The way that splits are done in Japan and the way that publishing is done in Japan is very different. And you have to realize that if you're placing a song in the Japanese market, you are placing a song with an artist who most likely is a very successful artist in what is the second largest music market in the world. So if you want in, you're going to have to adapt to certain ways of doing business and certain ways of doing business that you may be uncomfortable with. But in Japan, that's the way that business is done. And the good thing about Japan, I think maybe different from other countries, is that as far as if you're a music publisher and you're working with songwriters, the way that you get paid is certainly much faster than any place else in the world. Jazz Record is out 4 times a year. If a single, and we still have singles in Japan, if a single comes out in September, you will see mechanical income in December, and certainly no later than March. I mean, that's how quickly the cycle is, and that money comes in quite regularly. It does for mechanical, for performance. Sync is a whole different world as well. The sync fee is a fee that, from your standpoint, would be, well, wait a minute, is this major car brand or is this major beverage brand? Shouldn't it be equal to, if it's the second largest music market in the world, equal to what I'm getting in the US or I can get in Europe? The big difference in Japan is you make most of your money in Japan not only with the sync, but also with the performance income that's associated with the sync. And that's collected by the society. It's based on, just to give it to you very simply, it's about $100 to $120 per ad per airing. If you do it 10 times, if you air it 10 times, it's $1,200. If you air it 100 times, it's $12,000. It adds up very, very quickly. The easy example I can give, we did a sync several years ago for a major international artist. The sync was $80,000, which is respectable. Yeah. It doesn't sound like. Absolutely. But the back-end performance income based on the broadcast royalty for the sync was $240,000. And that's where you make your money, is to try and get locked in on that side. So again, there's just a lot of differences in terms of how you need to adapt and what you need to kind of get your head around. And that's what we, hopefully as a publisher, are there to help to guide you through and explain as well.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And just to round things out, I think the message here is that if you're going to go into the Japanese market, at least from what I've gleaned from Jonny, you should go in from co-writing, songwriting, collaboration.
Yeah, you know, that's one avenue. Again, that builds an opportunity for the artist and exposes whether it's the artist or the songwriter to the marketplace. But again, I'm not discouraging anybody from trying the artist side as well. I mean, it's the same always. If it's a good artist that's going to work for the market, and it's a good song, and you find the right A&R person, then obviously things can happen with that as well. So.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it is possible, and we do see it happen, of course. But you got to be realistic.
Yeah.
The market is different than a lot of other markets that you're going to have. You're going to have to look at it differently, and you're also going to have to look at it on a very sort of long-term basis, I think.
Yes, agreed. It does take time, and one of I think it's true in countries all over the world, but I think in Asia in particular, and Japan very particular, is what takes the longest is that development of trust. And you're building a relationship based on trust. And once people begin to trust who you are and how you do business, then the doors really open up in terms of, they want to use more of your songs, they want to work together with you, they want to do this. It's just that first phase takes a very, very long time to get there. And if you're patient enough to stick with it, then ultimately the business opportunities will come with that.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to end a conversation. And Jonny, I want to thank you so much for your insights and for taking the time with us today.
You bet. Appreciate it. And I'm around if anybody needs to talk to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonny, as always.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.